great. I mean, we
Let's
may or
do
may
the
not use
video.
it.
That's fine. Let's do the video.
So the only thing is that I'm sitting here in Washington, D.C., and Joe is in New York, and I don't have video capability in my conference room. So you just get to see my lovely picture there.
Okay, that's fine.
But you and Joe could be on video, which would be fantastic since he'll be.
Okay.
Well, yeah, actually, for bandwidth reasons, I just prefer Christina. Christina, you could just put your video on
I
then.
don't have a video.
No, no,
I
no.
mean,
So how do we put my video on?
Yes.
do you see a little camera icon at the bottom
Yeah,
of your screen?
start
If you
video.
just click on that, it should work.
Okay, you see me?
Yes, do.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay,
Okay.
great. Great. Well, thank you so much, Christina, for sitting down with us. We really appreciate it. I'm sure you've seen Christina's document, which gives you some context. We are developing a series of
Thank you.
conversations with innovators in SBC, and you obviously are one of these people. And we wanted to, have an interview with you in order to bring out some of the ideas that you talk about, and therefore expose them to the wider nutrition community, which, in some respects, there's a lot of talk about theory in SBC, but not. It's hard to translate it into practice. So that's what we're trying to sort of
Of
help
course.
people do.
Yeah,
So you've seen these questions. I'm just going to start with them. Unless Christina,
that's
do you
fine.
want to say anything else by way of introduction?
Yeah, sure. And I'll just introduce myself briefly, and also we have Joy Del Rosso in the room too. So we'll just do a quick little introductions. We obviously know who you are, Christina, but so my name is Christina Granger, and I am the Social and Behavior Change Advisor for the Alive and Thrive program based out of our headquarters in Washington, D.C. And I think we gave you a bit of background on Alive and Thrive, but we can do a quick synopsis again if you want.
I look at it on the internet.
Okay.
So I wanted to know who you are and what you do. So yes, I know.
Okay. Fantastic. And I'll let Joy introduce herself too.
Hi, Christina. This is Joy Del Rosso. So I lead what's called the Knowledge Leadership and Learning team, but it also has social behavior change. And I have a social behavior change advisor hat as well, and that's where my passion is. And I want to ask you, okay, how do you pronounce? You heard my last name was Del Rosso, but but I got that through my husband. So how do you pronounce your last name?
Okay, in Italy, we don't have the K, and so CH is sometimes pronounced as K. So my last name is Bicchieri.
That's what I thought. Okay, Bicchieri.
Thank you.
Okay. And thank you for doing this. It's wonderful. I'm so excited to hear it.
Yeah, so we're just kicking off this series. You're you're actually our first interviewee, so apologies if we're a little
Okay.
here. So we have some people that we're doing interviews with, and also some people that are developing some kind of thought pieces, narrative pieces. And so we're currently working on the first few contributors, you being one of them, and then we're conceptualizing what the website's going to look like, and all of that. So, of course, we're happy to keep you abreast of those developments because you are one of our kind of testers, our first contributors. So it's still in development, but we're really excited about this because I think this is something that's really needed in the nutrition community, especially. I know that there's been a lot of norms talk in adolescent health and sexual and reproductive health, but I think there's been quite a bit less in nutrition. So, and I know that when we talked, what was that, a few weeks ago or a month ago? I know we talked a little bit about some work that you were doing. So
Yes.
it's great to learn more, and so that's kind of where we want to go today. And I guess we'll let Joe take it from there.
Okay.
Great. Thank you so much, Christina and Joy, for the words of introduction. So let me just start with the top here. Christina, if you could just tell us, what are social norms and why do we need to care about them for behavior change
Okay.
as it relates to food and feeding for children under 2?
Okay, so social norms are behavioral rules. You know, they tell you what to do, how to behave in a set of situation, not in a single situation, but usually they relate to families of similar situations. And remember, norms are properties of groups, not of people. Okay, now there are certain components to norms. I make a big distinction between descriptive and social norms. Sometimes people call them descriptive and injunctive, but it is a very coarse description. Now, I gave an operational definition of social norm. What do I mean by this? I mean that you want to define social norm in a simple way and in a way that allows you to measure, to answer the question, are there norms here? What sort of norms they are? Okay? So what are the three elements that are crucial to norms? One is empirical expectations. So we measure what people expect other people in their reference group or network. I am coming to that definition in a second. So what do they do? What do you believe they do in these particular situations? The second is normative expectations that are very proper to social norms. That is, what do you think these people, most people in your reference network, think one should be doing? So there is a should there. Okay, this is a normative. And suppose you have data about, we do surveys. So I have the empirical and I have the normative expectation. And I want to know if they have a causal influence on behavior. This is crucial because people may have all the expectation in the world, but they will not bite. They will not follow through with behavior. So we have to measure the causal influence. And in a nutshell, I say, can we measure whether people have preferences for such behavior conditional on these social expectations? Okay, and I can talk later on about how we measure these things. So social norms has three components: empirical expectation, normative expectation, and conditional preferences. If all three are present, you have a social norm. Now let me talk for a moment of descriptive norms. Because very often what you think is a social norm is in fact a descriptive norm. Descriptive norm is a pattern usually of behavior in which people have empirical expectations about what other people do, and there is an incentive to behave like other people. That is, they have conditional preferences about behaving in a similar way as other people behave, just based on the empirical expectation. Let me make you an example. A social norm. Think of a norm of fairness. Okay, in a norm of fairness, suppose you are in a population where people usually behave in a very fair way. So you have an empirical expectation about that. But also you know, or at least believe, that they expect you to behave in a fair way in the sense that they think is the right thing to do. And the third element, you want to behave in that way because you have these expectations. So this is a social norm. Let's look at the descriptive norm. We obey traffic lights. Traffic lights tell us to stop or go. And we have empirical expectations about other people, other drivers. Let's say you drive a car. What do? Do they stop at red? Do they go with green? And what do I expect me to do? Is an empirical expectation. I don't want to die and I don't want to kill anyone, and therefore I have a preference for following the rule. But these are two very different things. Descriptive norm has no normative content. Social norm has normative content. I can add something if you want, why social norm also have this normative content, because typically social norm solve negative externalities. So for example, norm of fairness, cooperation, reciprocity, a lot of these norms push us to behave in ways that we may not like to behave. There is a tension. Social norms are there because there is a tension between selfishness and collective welfare. Okay? Think of open defecation. You know, open defecation creates negative externality, negative health effects for everybody in the environment. However, you want, and it is something that people like to do, is easy to do, is costless. And so you want to create some sort of norm to push people to behave in a collectively positive way. That's why we need social norm. Descriptive norm, you know, are very much in line with selfishness, rationality. I stop at the red because I don't want to be hit and I don't want to hit other people. It's very costly.
Okay.
Is that clear?
Yes, I think to some degree the examples help.
Yes.
Can you tell us when we're talking to social and behavior change experts, do you think, I mean, how would you explain social norms to these experts if it would vary from what you just said? Would you change the way you explain it? I mean,
I can usually what I do when I do, for example, training for UNICEF people, etc., I take examples.
okay.
I take examples, and one example you give me is nutrition. It's very interesting because we just finished a report for UNICEF in Mali about childhood nutrition. And it's very interesting because they were quite successful in convincing young ladies to give early milk, colostrum, to the newborn. Okay, but there is a big gap about what to give or not to give little kids beyond milk. And what we discovered is that the big decision maker about nutrition is the mother-in-law. So actually, you know, giving tea to kids or other solid foods is not so much a norm, okay, but is supported, is a mixed model, is supported by the social norm of obeying your mother-in-law. And so even if you try to convince the young ladies that no, the tea is a bad idea, still you should convince the mother-in-law. The important reference network is the mother-in-law.
Okay, that's very interesting. So can you give me some examples? You mentioned that example of working on nutrition. Can you give us some other examples of work you've done on social norms in nutrition?
Social norm and nutrition, we had some study in Sierra Leone at the very beginning, years ago with UNICEF. And again, what I saw was that the young ladies were very reluctant to give early milk because, you know, Sierra Leone is a very hot place, and they thought, you know, the child is like, you know, a honored guest, and you give water to the guest, not this, you know, semi-hot milk. that doesn't look like even like milk, because colostrum doesn't look like milk. And so it's very, very important in this case to change the beliefs about colostrum. So what was done, for example, was to put colostrum in a glass and wait. And you see that after some time, there is a little part of milk and a lot of water. And so what we were showing these people is, look, it's not true that colostrum is so different from water. There is a lot of water there. So you have to convince people in a very practical and simple way. Okay, is not working to tell people, you know, our theories about colostrum and how good it is, etc. If they think water is important, you have to show that colostrum is 3/4 water, basically.
Mhm.
After you do that, then people get more convinced. But again, the mother-in-law had a very, very important role to play. So you had to discuss it with them.
Christina, I wanted to chime in with a bit of a follow-up because I think this is really interesting, and this is definitely somewhere where I think as in the social and behavior change nutrition community, we are kind of skirting the issue. So, we do the formative research to recognize that the mothers-in-law are very influential with a lot of these feeding decisions, and this is
Yes.
pretty standard globally. And I think what we end up doing then is just saying, okay, let's do some interventions to educate the mothers-in-law and try to convince them of, why they need to do X, Y, or Z. And I think what we don't do the best job of is really hitting the kind of the normative feature of this and how we talk about, because you said it's not, it's not their belief, it's the norm of obeying the mother-in-law. So should we actually be coming at this from a totally different angle and not even talking about the recommended behavior and just going towards the obeying issue, or what do you suggest here?
The obeying issue is very touchy because, especially in villages, in more backward type of cultural environment, it is very hard to overlook the influence of the mother-in-law. So you may work with them, but work with them in many different ways. Okay, first of all, when you do information campaigns, are you sure that you are dealing with all the beliefs they have about nutrition and are taking them into account? The example I gave you of keeping the colostrum in a glass and showing that there is water was responding to the belief, very crucial, that milk is not water and you need to give water to a child. Okay, and so you want to show that that is not true, but you have to do that in a very convincing, simple, visual way. Is like with the campaign they did on sanitation, open defecation, when they took the shit and put it, in a circle in the village, and then they put food, not the clothes, but put food there, and then let people observe the insect going from the feces to the food. And let them understand that they are eating contaminated food. So you have to convince people by looking, by putting yourself into their frame of mind, by understanding what their factual beliefs are. Example is food is food, and shit is shit, and they don't have anything to do with each other. Wrong. Or milk is milk and water is water. Wrong. Okay. So you have also to convince people factually. Right. And very often campaigns go over the head of people. So I think it's very important that to take into account their cultural beliefs, factual beliefs, and work around them. This is the first thing you should do before any norm or anything. Okay? Because I think a lot of these campaigns are not good campaigns. First point. Second point, yes, you realize the mother-in-law are important. So what prevents them from adopting new behavior? You have to understand that. And it may be that they think that they will be looked down by other women, older women in the village, or that other women in the village don't do that, and so they would be the only deviant to do that. So you have to deal with that problem. Very often, what we observe is that changing people empirical expectations. So, for example, suppose you are dealing with all these older women in a village, and you try, to understand what their beliefs are and how, to move them away from those beliefs in a very realistic and simple way. And then, this is a work I'm doing in India, you collect intentions to change behavior, because you cannot cheat people telling them, oh, most older women now do something different. They know it's false. But what you can do is collect intention, commitment to do things differently, and broadcast that. And this has an effect in changing empirical expectation.
Right, because it changes what people think that the other people in their reference group are doing.
Yes, or are going to do.
Right.
Remember.
So, yeah, you said something really interesting just a minute ago where you said, first you should address kind of the factual information and campaigns before the norm. And I think that's really interesting, because in some ways that's kind of what we do. And I guess then we think, okay, if it's still not changing, then we need to dig deeper and look into what the normative issues are. And so that's not necessarily wrong, or what do you think?
I think you have to work first and foremost. People are using social norm right and left. Very often, this behavior is not a norm, is not a social norm. At best, is a descriptive norm, for example. So the intervention will be very different. But the most important thing is pay attention to their factual beliefs and how to change them. This is the first thing you should do. And if there is something that is not working there, ask yourself if you have done everything to change such beliefs.
Okay, that's fascinating. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, should we move on to the next question?
Sure.
So how did you see number 3, and in the work we do, we often reference people's attitudes or beliefs about recommended behaviors. How do attitudes and beliefs differ from social norms?
Well, attitude is a positive or negative appraisal of something. So I dislike something, I like something, I think I should not, etc. The concept of attitude is very generic. And so it's not such a good, precise concept to measure. What I like to measure is what I call personal normative beliefs. What does it mean? There are 2 types. There are moral ones. So suppose that you have the factual belief that water is crucial for the little baby survival. Then you will have a normative beliefs that you would be a criminal not to give water to the child. And it's your duty to do that. This is almost a moral belief. Okay. On the other hand, there are lots of personal beliefs that are prudent. So, for example, if I think that smoking causes cancer, I will tell you, I believe you should not smoke. There is a should there, but is not a moral should is a prudent should. And the concept of attitude doesn't make a distinction between the two, but you have to understand the difference when you measure, because the intervention will be very different if there is a moral injunction versus a prudent injunction.
Okay,
Can you give us another example of the prudent injunction?
Okay, well, the smoking is one thing. For example, think of believing that colostrum is really unhealthy for a little child and they need other things. So obviously you should not give colostrum. Is a prudent thing. You should not do that. Okay, if you think that something is bad for health, then you should not do that. It's prudential. Okay, in that case, there might be an accompanying moral thing. If you are a good mother, you will do the right thing for your child. But there is the first should is prudential. You say, hey, this is bad for the child. Whatever belief you have to justify that sentence, then of course you would say you shouldn't do that. So your attitude depends on an assessment, a factual assessment. This thing is bad, is unhealthy, will make the child sick. Then you should not do that.
Right.
You see the difference?
Yeah, thank you. Joe, I think you're muted.
Also, another thing that I want to tell you about attitude, beliefs, and social norm, we know that attitudes do not predict behavior. Okay? There is a lot of research done on that.
Yeah.
And attitudes do not predict behavior. Beliefs do not predict behavior. You have to have a merging of beliefs, expectation, and know that they have a causal influence. Only if they have a causal influence. And we know that social expectation often have a causal influence. Attitudes don't.
Right. I think, that's actually a perfect segue to the next question, which is, and you've kind of covered this, but I wonder if there's any more to say, which is, we recognize that these different norms, whether they're social or descriptive or the others, kind of underlie everything that we do as people, and then also that we do in our programming a bit, right? Because they dictate how humans behave.
Yeah.
So I think the struggle is, how do we know when it's important in our programming to really investigate and understand and address these norms, and when it's not, and when we can just maybe focus on these kind of factual campaigns?
Okay, I tell you what we do in our research. We do several steps. We prepare big surveys. The first part of the survey is factual beliefs. What do they believe about this practice? Like not giving colostrum. What do they think about that? Why do they think is good or bad, etc. In a very non-judgmental way. This is very important, because you know that you don't want to have an experimental effect, people telling you what they think you want to hear. So we have the factual beliefs, we measure them, then we measure the personal normative beliefs that are very usually linked to the factual, okay? Then we start measuring the social expectation. So we start asking people, okay, what do you believe? Most people, and again, I will come to the concept of reference network in a moment, in your network that matter to you, to this behavior, to this decision. What do you think they do? Okay, This is one. These are the empirical expectation about what other people do. And then we ask the normative. We want to know what